Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's okay. Thank you for joining us for our first ever LCF In Conversation event. It's fantastic to see so many people here for what hopefully or certainly will be a really powerful and important conversation. Quick introduction, my name is Jodie, I'm head of comms for London Coffee Festival, and it's a real pleasure for me to open tonight's discussion around inclusivity within coffee. Coffee is more than a drink, it's a culture, it's a community, and I think for a community to thrive, it's really important that everybody has the opportunity to belong. So to have conversations like tonight are really important for us to grow. Before I hand over to Harry, who's going to host today, I just want to say a quick thank you to the team at Send, not only for putting this on for us and letting us use their space, but also for their continued support with the London Coffee Festival. We all know it's a challenging venue, but we're really proud that we're able to make LCF an inclusive event, and a lot of that is down to Harry and the team. So can we have a round of applause for the Send team, please? So on to tonight's discussion. So the panel is going to focus on a range of different things. So some of the things that we'll cover are kind of representation within leadership, barriers to entry, inclusive hiring and progression, but essentially anything that, and what it truly means for a coffee shop to foster belonging. I think what makes tonight really special, and Harry will kind of go through the panelists, but each of these panelists have lived experiences and shared expertise in this area, and they know what it takes to create a better and more equitable coffee culture. So from our perspective, this is a super relaxed event, but we really hope that you'll leave this evening with a new perspective, practical ideas, and a renewed energy to make inclusivity a priority in your own spaces. That's it from me. Other than just thank you so much for joining us. It really does mean a lot. And I'm going to hand over to Harry for tonight's session.
Welcome everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, I think first and foremost, I am your host tonight, which means I have a legal obligation to get out of the way. I think the first thing I'd like to do is introduce you to everyone here. And the first people to introduce are the audience, yourselves. As you look around the room, there's probably a lot of familiar faces. There's some new faces potentially. These are fellow advocates, fellow allies, people who care about making the coffee industry more accessible. And that's actually really exciting. I think when we planned this event, we didn't expect as many people to come who have. And I just want to thank you all for coming. I think it's really exciting to see what might be the start of an exciting movement to make the industry more accessible. I think it's important to say that we're about to talk about some spicy subjects. There's some things that make people uncomfortable here. We'll be talking about race, we'll be talking about disabilities, we'll be talking about identity. It's very natural to become defensive when we talk about that. It's very natural to feel intimidated and to be worried about saying the wrong thing. Really important that we feel the only wrong thing to say is nothing. So please have conversations tonight. Have conversations as part of this panel, ask questions, and talk to the people around you, because I hope that the conversations we spark here will continue. And you might have some follow-up conversations in the weeks to come and in the build-up to the coffee festival itself. I think it's important to feel comfortable. So on that note, please feel comfy while we're talking. If you need to get up and have a drink, if you run out of pizza, do get up and have it. Obviously be quiet so everyone can hear, but at any time, just get up and go. If you need the bathroom, they're quite hard to find. So you head all the way around the bar, just past the coffee machine, past the television, the bathroom's there. Again, whilst we're talking, get up and go. Don't suffer in silence. Please feel comfortable to do that. Next, I'll introduce myself, I suppose. So my name's Harry. For those who don't know me, I founded and run Send Coffee, which stands for Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, hence the name. We work with young adults with various disabilities, aged roughly 18 to 25-ish, and we provide an occupational therapy model which supports them into independent adult life. So we train them in our coffee shops, give them barista skills, and use that as a way of helping them learn key adult life skills and building independence. I'm also very lucky to be a trustee of a refugee charity called Breadwinners, which supports asylum seekers in seeking their first job here in the UK, and as a way of integrating into British culture. My previous work, I've worked with survivors of domestic abuse and the homeless, and worked with young offenders. And I think throughout my time working with all of those groups, I've learned a lot about what I believe helps those groups with accessibility. But I'm still learning, still growing, and I'd love to hear what other people think about that as well. And yeah, I pass over to Muriel, perhaps.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I'm the founder of Mahaba Cafe. It's a small coffee shop in Ealing, and we are also offering a training to young people with learning disabilities and autism. And the way we work is we work with referral partners. Yeah, so it's going to be colleges doing supported internship or provisions like Ealing MenCap or Shore Trust, and they're sending their young people to us for a period of time, minimum 3 months, but we really pushing to have longer time with our young people. So same, we train them for barista skills, but also mostly employability skills. So, teamwork, making sure they turn up on time, making sure they know how to travel to us, and all those skills.
Hello, my name is Maxwell. I work across the coffee industry for almost 20 years now on all sorts of projects. I feel very lucky to have collaborated with all sorts of people, from innovation to my own coffee companies. And I'm also a trustee on the SEM board, but also on a charity called Project Waterfall, which helps improve sanitation and clean drinking water in coffee growing regions around the world. But I'm involved in quite a bit of sort of research and educational frameworks as well that I think are relevant to tonight's conversation. But hopefully I bring sort of quite a commercial viewpoint to the discussion. I think you have to figure out how things can work in this industry from a business point of view, as well as from a, conceptual point of view.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jodie. I like to say I'm coffee industry adjacent. So I'll be speaking from, I guess, a bit of a consumer and lived experience standpoint. My background is actually as a professional athlete. I'm a 3-time Olympian and founder of Listen Journal now. As I transitioned out of sport, I started a journal and community centering the experiences of women of color. So we have a once-a-year journal, which is completely submission-based, allowing women of color to tell their stories on their own terms, which is something I'm really passionate about. And we also run events, and most of our events are run through a coffee lens. So we have something called Listen Coffee Club, and my passion really is getting more women of color, especially Black women, involved in the coffee space, and just generally making that a more comfortable space for Black women to enter. So it's the lens I'll be speaking from today.
Thank you so much. I mean, honestly, I feel like with these panels, we've probably all been to a lot of panels, but I really wanted us to have a group of people who had fantastic experiences and fantastic lenses to share from. So I think everyone here has a lot to say with fantastic insights. And I know that there's a lot of people here in the room who also have those insights. So I think as we go through and ask some questions, I think it'd be really exciting to kind of spark some conversations. We are talking about accessibility and inclusion. And I love to start these sort of conversations with a definition. I'd love for us to agree what each of us defines accessibility and inclusion as, and perhaps starting the way around, maybe Jodie, you could tell us what you think it means.
Sure. I think, honestly, for me, I'm going to keep it very simple. Accessibility and inclusion is just everyone feeling comfortable within a space. For me, it is just entering a room or a community or whatever that may be, and you not feeling like you have any barrier to entry to that space, feeling like there is no discomfort. I mean, obviously, everyone's going to have anxieties and things like that, but nothing that is physically stopping you from feeling comfortable in that space. That's kind of what that means to me.
And Maxwell?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's about the ability to engage, right? So I've always been big in coffee that I really hate the term education, like educating people. It's about allowing people the opportunity to opt in and engage. And really the key bit is considering what that means for different people, right? What that means for one person might be different to someone else from a different background in a different position. So it's considering how do we allow people the opportunity to engage.
Yeah.
To me, it's really about giving everyone the same respect, the same opportunities to pursue whatever they want to pursue, their aspiration, their goals. I mean, and giving them the like making the changes to be able to make this happen.
So that makes sense. And I think for us within Send, we often think about, rather than thinking about equitable outcomes, we actually focus on the barriers. And I think that that's what our way of viewing the accessibility question is: how do we lower those barriers? And actually, I find measuring the outcomes is not always the healthiest approach. And I know that's something that different people have very different opinions on. I think it might be an interesting question for us as a panel. Does anyone feel strongly about that, about measurements? What are the best ways for us to measure accessibility? What would be a way that you could look at an organization or a company or even as venue and say, is it accessible? Any strong opinion?
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, it's tough, right? The representation issue is, you see this throughout the coffee industry. If you define it by a specific representation that you'd like to see, I think I agree with you, that's problematic, right? But it's like studying lots of things. There's probably something you can learn from that. Like, that is definitely a metric to consider, but it needs more context, right, to understand what that means, right? It can tell you something if it's extremely all, one group of people and there's no diversity whatsoever. That probably tells you something. But deciding preemptively that you want to see a specific representation is very problematic. And you see that in the coffee supply chain and stuff, saying we want, to see this many women producing coffee, etc. And then when you start to delve into it and talk to growing communities, just because someone was involved doesn't mean that was their goal or what they want, right? So I think it's like you talk about with Send is, the goal is to give opportunities for employment, but success isn't someone just being employed, right? It's broadening their life experience through the and adding richness and quality to their life. You don't define it simply by did they get a job at the end of this. And I think that same thing is going to be true, which is quite sort of a complicated matrix, really, which is you can't use one thing to define whether you think you've had success, right?
Yeah, and I think that's something you and I have talked about quite a bit, Muriel. Obviously both trying to get people with disabilities into jobs. Half the time we find them a job, they don't want it. There was a teenager that we worked with. I think that's our primary challenge, is sometimes we're working with very young people. A few years ago, we got him a lovely job, and he turned to me and said, "Harry, this is really going to cut into my video game time. I don't know how I'm going to fit this in." And we were quite proud of him, weirdly, because it was annoying for us that he wasn't going to take this job. But it did mean that we had taught him how to choose what he did with his time. And that was valuable. And that was almost a success story for us. But yeah, and I know that you get jobs outcomes as well. And
Yeah, it's very hard because, obviously the numbers are like employment for young people with learning disability is extremely low. It's like 5% in the, nationally. In Ealing, it's even worse for some reason. It's 2.2%. So that's why we exist. And so, any sort of, anything better than that is already success. But then it feels like you have to really reach those really high level of, I don't know, there is something, for us, definitely just seeing how they improve in all the life skills and in all the, their confidence and, the feeling like share, I don't know, like being part of the team, that happiness, all that is so much more important, and all the skills they learn.
Sorry, what's the age range that you define as young people?
We are going to up to.
I'm not a young person anymore. I'm just curious.
We are going from 16 to 30. 30 is, yeah.
it's interesting. I think we stopped working with under 18 ourselves. We found that our success was mostly on the adult life skills. And we found that, 16, 17-year-olds rarely wanted a job, but also rarely wanted to learn to cook for themselves. And that was, again, we're empowering people to make their own decisions. It's a tricky balance, but
So just to add on to that, actually, I think that's a good point. So I think sometimes that data and numbers can sometimes perpetuate the same systems we're working in. I think often it's actually best to just ask the communities or the people that you are trying to speak to or get, more into the workplace or whatever that may be. I think often the best solution is just to, like you were saying, with getting more women into producing, that may not be what their end goal was. A lot of women producers, it's their only option. They don't actually they would rather build a different business. But, sometimes I think when you look at it from whatever lens that may be, whether it's a Western lens or whatever lens that is, we can often look and think it's always a numbers game. And we don't bother to ask the questions of the people that we're actually trying to, quote unquote, help or save. And I think that can kind of, just end up perpetuating the same models and systems that we're seeing in place without meaning to. But I think sometimes it can end up being quite like extractive in the end.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of examples of that in the coffee supply chain. I know that's something that you've both talked quite extensively about, and we experienced something similar to this a few years back, where there was a law change in Uganda, which was through a Western lens, especially, was very problematic because it was a homophobic law change. From us selling coffee from Uganda to big companies. Quite a few of my customers said, we don't want this coffee anymore because we don't respect the decision out there. And that was a conversation I remember having, following on with you, Maxwell, about what's the right choice here, because actually we're now applying our Western lens and logic to a different country. And that's actually, it's interesting when those two things become incompatible, like the views we hold here matching to growing communities. And I think that's where the sort of moral positioning of a coffee company is very challenging to maintain on a global scale. And I'd be curious, how that works with that supply chain. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
Yes. No. Before we started this, Harry said, if you're speaking too much and someone else needs to speak, he's going to give us a sign. So I'm waiting for that sign. Now he's asked me this question. I wrote a book called The Business of Specialty Coffee, and a lot of it was me writing about what I felt sort of passionate owner-operators or people working in coffee could benefit from understanding, sort of treating it more like a business and a career earlier rather than being caught out 5-6 years in. And so I wrote all that really quickly. And the bit I got stuck on in the middle was sort of this idea of ethics and morals in the coffee supply chain. I actually think there's no such thing as ethical coffee now. I think it's a weird term to use because ethical means different things to different people. So how can you use it as a catch-all term? How can you say ethical coffee? People in this room may have lots of similar agreements on morals and ethics. They may not. They may differ on abortion or whatever the topic is. So I don't think you can ever call something ethical because you don't have agreements on what ethical is, right? But one thing I did more and more as I sort of thought about it is the easy thing to say is, specialty coffee is good because of these reasons and it's superior from an ethical point of view. And the more and more I studied it, I was like, it's just not true. Specialty coffee is really just expensive coffee, like nicer tasting coffee. And then it's actually a real stretch to suggest that focusing on that is going to solve all the problems. But what I also don't like about it is this dynamic it creates with this juxtaposition between smallholder specialty being good and large commercial being evil and bad. And actually, you can see this throughout the supply chain is whatever the specific metric it is you're looking at from, it could be anything. Could be like equitable trading, conditions of work, payment. Nearly always the large commercial coffee companies are doing a better job, right? And small indie companies, I'm pro-independent coffee companies, but I'm not anti-large company. And actually, indie companies, I always laugh when people say, you've got all these benefits being a small, nimble company. I'm like, look, there's no benefits to being small, like none, right? Larger companies generally are in a better position to do business. And you can see that through everything in terms of, policies. When Harry was talking about sort of some of the anti-bias practice they have, one of these ideas of trying to avoid people just hiring people like them, right? Because I see that a lot in coffee, is that coffee is this counterculture movement that talks about diversity and inclusion and equity. And it's actually just a bunch of people who are the same working together, but they are different to the commercial people they don't associate with. But these companies end up being not diverse at all. They just hire people like them who look the same and both like natural wine and want to hang out and do the same thing. It's true. Right. So I think specialty coffee makes a lot of claims as a community. And then you might rightly say, well, who's making those claims? I'm like, yeah, good point. I'm not sure. Like, we don't have an agreed sort of town hall meeting where we all say what we stand for. It's like this thing that's happened through osmosis amongst the coffee community, right? And it's interesting that there's some threads that have come through where you ask people what specialty coffee stands for, and they're going to give you some similar answers. But actually, when you start to dig into those things, you go, is that actually true? It's not.
Can I just ask, so then you don't trust the labels at all, like the
No, coffee, absolutely not. But coffee, if we look at labeling, so if you were to put a product into a supermarket, now it depends who it's with, right? Especially coffee is not well represented in a supermarket. That's a different conversation. But the labeling laws are much more stringent, and larger companies will be careful what they claim. Small indie companies, they're not careful what they claim at all. They hire someone in marketing to do some ad spend, and they're like, oh, maybe people click on ethical, click. Maybe, direct trade. Everyone says direct trade. Like, there is a real lack of audit and compliance in specialty coffee. And generally, I believe that it's all very well-meaning. It's a lot of people in small independent companies thinking, well, we want to do good. And they look at their peers, and their peers are doing the same thing. They're like, well, they're saying that, so we'll say it too. And so there's a real lack of third-party verification and audit in specialty. And I think there's a lot of greenwashing, a lot of overclaiming.
Yeah, and I think we had an interesting conversation the other day, Jodie, about the narrative within specialty coffee that they think things are really good, things are really inclusive and ethical. And I feel like that might be a bit of a myth at times. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I definitely do. Actually, first of all, on the labeling thing, I think that's a really interesting thing within specialty coffee is a lot of the opportunities I've had to speak with particularly like women producers or women at source is there's this almost trend of one sticking a producer's photo on a bag of specialty coffee and claiming that they've told the story of this producer, and half the time the producer doesn't even know that their photo is being used in this way, and it becomes a very extractive practice. And two, specialty coffee is so often moving the goalpost of what speciality actually is. You know, we grade speciality so highly, and it's all coming from right at the very end, right? It's often European countries who are determining what specialty coffee is and what that means, right? And then we have all of these different growing special like fermentation processes and all of these different things that keep changing. And now people are being asked to, can we grow a pineapple next to this so that we can have this? It's actually ruining the farmer's land, and I find that can become a very extractive process in the name of us saying that it's good, or saying that speciality is being paid more. I think often it can actually just be perpetuating the same things. But to your go on.
No,
I feel you. Please.
No, it's interesting, right? I think a lot of coffee roasteries who want to see a certain thing from a farmer
Yes.
would not be as open about their own business, right?
Exactly.
They wouldn't be able to have someone investigate them
Yep.
and open them up and say, so what are you doing here, here, and here, and here,
Yeah.
right? So I totally agree. I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so often it's also, the roasters or the people right at the end of the chain coming in and kind of dictating to the farmers how to grow their produce and their crop, which has often been, in their family for generations and generations, and they are the ones with the knowledge of farming. And we're coming in being like, oh, can we just tweak this so it has, a more acidic, mouthfeel? And it's like, does that really, really matter at the end of the day, to be moving the goalpost that much?
Yeah. Well, from a business point of view, I think often what happens as well is that the small specialty coffee company thinks it's more impactful and more important than it is, right?
Yeah.
Or, if you look at it from a pure business point of view, of like a management consultant, you look at the business, you go, okay, who matters to it depends on the size of the producer or the farmer. But it's a bit like the whole direct trade thing kills me, because you explain that actually it doesn't make sense, and then someone goes, oh, okay, so what's your alternative? And I'm sort of like, no, we're continuing to have this conversation that you fundamentally believe that is the best approach to buying coffee. But if you think about it from a business point of view, you'd much rather sell to a green trader who goes and markets your coffee to lots of different clients and buys in bulk from you. You're a more valuable client, right, than a little roaster who buys 4 bags and emails you all the time giving you a hard time about it, right? Like, the pure economics don't work. And often specialties, that's part of specialty thinking it's more important and it's having more impact than it is, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm going to get back to your actual original question.
Yeah, it's a good conversation.
which I've actually forgotten. Wait, I had a train of thought. Repeat the question.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it was around, you've obviously created intentional spaces, particularly for women of colour. And, what do you think the kind of industry still misunderstands about access and, inclusion?
Yeah, I think aside from the obvious chain issues, I think from a consumer standpoint, kind of, Maxwell, to your point earlier, in that, coffee can be labeled as this quite alternative space, right? We live in this hipster land where everyone thinks they're very different, but within the differences, it is still very much a monolith of type of person. Often you walk into a coffee shop, there's lots of memes on the internet talking about, oh, you want your barista to look a certain way, and that's going to be a good cup of coffee, and I think that is perpetuated often in the coffee space. You do often walk into coffee shops, and there is definitely a general look within the coffee shop, right? I think we can all picture what a coffee shop looks like. And I think when you are a person that doesn't look like that, it can feel like a very intimidating space. And I also think when you're new to coffee and you have an interest, but maybe you're not a specialist, it can be an extremely intimidating place to walk into. I, very early on in my coffee journey, had a lot of experiences where I'd walk up to a bar and I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know what I was ordering. I had an interest, but it kind of felt like I wasn't allowed to ask questions, or you already had to have the knowledge walking in. And I think that can be very off-putting for people, especially if you're already walking into a room, not feeling like you belong within that room, already feeling like people are kind of looking at you like, what are you doing here? Whether or not that's true, I think that can then add another layer on when you do get to the bar and you don't necessarily feel comfortable to ask those questions. I think it can put you off wanting to interact with those specialty coffee spaces.
I think it's really interesting kind of challenge. I think we all know what we're talking about here, where going into a coffee shop, you typically have the same type of person. I walked into one of my shops the other day and I realized that all of the baristas behind the bar were black. And I realized I suddenly had a moment of like, isn't that unusual in London? And London is a very diverse place. But I thought to myself, how have we as an organization achieved this in a way that others don't? And we've got a strange hiring practice within Send. We have one rule that is, if you're hiring someone who matches most of your identity factors, then you need a second opinion from someone within the organization who doesn't match your identity factors. And that seems like a small thing, but that person has veto. And that stopped what used to happen within my companies, where we would have generations of staff. We had a generation of staff that were all Spanish. And I wondered why that had happened. And I looked at it, and it was because the person in charge of hiring was Spanish. And that was partly where that came from, was realizing we need to make sure that it's an interesting thing. I think we've all probably seen that in companies, right? There's a sort of daisy chain of people being hired. And I think it's important that we use that mindset. And I think that's something that's really helped Send stop perpetuating that, well, as best we can. I think there's always ways of improving. But yeah, I guess it's we've talked a lot about this, but I know that one of the things that comes up with hiring is obviously reasonable adjustments as a term. And that's something you've spoken extensively about, Muriel. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on when you're hiring someone in. What is a reasonable adjustment? What is reasonable to kind of do?
So, I mean, there are lots of very small changes you can do to make your coffee shop more accessible for young people, or well, any people with learning disabilities. I guess one of them would be for them to sometimes, if they are noise sensitive, just often they would just ask to wear noise cancelling earplugs, or when they are using the coffee machines, quite loud, so then they would just wear those, or at that time. We had also some young people that needed timers, and just to sort of know how long things would need. One actually is for her breaks. She really struggles to know when she needs to come back from her break.
We all do. Yeah.
We had sometimes the lights, so we had that actually at the beginning, but that can be a bit intense. So wearing glasses so that's just really small changes.
Do you have experiences where you feel something is an unreasonable adjustment?
Yeah, I very much have that. I think to kind of Jodie's point earlier, the key is to listen to people. So when you're kind of saying, this is what I need, you start from the position of believing them. And I think that actually sometimes you find yourself almost naturally doubting people when they say, no, I need this. I need a longer break. I need higher salary. Like some things that they might say, you sometimes think, okay, that probably isn't a reasonable adjustment. But as you listen to them, assume that they're telling the truth, you can come up with things that like, okay, that makes sense. We can make that work. And I think it's just starting from a position of that. And sometimes things conflict with the needs of the business. And that's where things get really complicated, because I think the business must survive. That's what pays everyone's salary. You have to think of it from perspective of how can business make this work and this person keep their job. And you have to always balance those two conversations. And I think it's so individually focused. Without revealing personal info, I don't want to kind of share examples because I feel like I'll be talking about individuals I know. And I think it's important to just listen to people, hear them out, and explain if you have to that you can't make that work without the business breaking down. And I think that's where it gets tricky. Do you have any experiences with that, Muriel?
Yes, I guess so. Yes, that's a kind of conversation we have to have. But very often it's actually not. I don't feel like it's unreasonable. I think it's completely understandable. I prefer to have a few little breaks rather than having one long one, which is absolutely fine. I prefer to. I need some time where it's completely quiet. I need really a quiet room. I need to get out of here. Whatever it is, I think very often it's reasonable, very reasonable, and I think it's just like.
Yeah, I mean, it's 90% of the time reasonable.
Yeah.
I think it is just knowing what you can afford to do. I think the key is that it's an adjustment. It's not giving extra, it's an adjustment. And I think that if it fits into your existing model, if you can't make adjustments, that's because you're running things too rigid. I think it's the best way to work with people is to listen to them, build a role around them. And I think that that's something that you mentioned, small businesses don't always have advantage. That's something they can do well.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's interesting, right? Because this whole conversation, the individual has to advocate for what they need to start with and feel that they can do that, right? And I don't feel like in most small businesses, people can do that.
That's true.
And also, that's the challenge of like small businesses are hard to run. They're often like under-resourced. They're not particularly profitable. It's hard for them to have, decent HR and, the time and the space to do these things. So I think often when they're overwhelmed, like the business owner or the business is overwhelmed, its immediate answer is no, right? Rather than to think, oh, actually, can we consider that? And actually, we should build into our culture that we encourage this consideration, right? But I think... a lot of small businesses they're like lifestyle businesses, aren't they? They are for the owner operators, and they just haven't thought about any of this. Like, I'd like to own a coffee shop. So I like sitting in them. So maybe I should run one. It's a very bad idea. But it's such a long, and that's sort of that encouraging, specialty coffee for me is such an anti-business space historically since I got into it. And I would say, inclusivity, accessibility, any structure around HR, that's actually behavior of a mature business. And a lot of specialty coffee businesses are not mature businesses. They just aren't. So, but I'm seeing it change, right? I was thinking about I was always adamant when I got into coffee that it wasn't just for a cliquey subculture, that it had a really wide audience, right, of all different people. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And I think you see some people who were there at the beginning, like they don't like that, right? It's like the music that isn't trendy anymore because it's popular, right? But I do think it is interesting to see specialty coffee, or I don't like calling it specialty coffee. I like to call it boutique coffee, right? Yeah, well, I just don't think it means special. You said it earlier. People change the goalposts, right? But I just don't think it's a very useful term. But and I think it is. There's a wider range of people interested than ever before. And also some of those businesses that did start small, some of them are maturing, they are bigger, and they have more responsibility to their people and themselves. So it's an interesting time, but a lot of operators just have no experience doing this. So it's a learning process for them as well, right?
I've got an interesting example. It's a bit on the nose, but the previous operators at the coffee festival, we reached out to them and we asked if we could help them do accessibility at the show. And they said no. They said that's not something they're interested in doing. And that's just, that wasn't for any malintent. That was just the nature of them saying we're not sure how that would work. And I'd say that, obviously William Reed, the new operator of the festival, just want to say they've been fantastic to us. They've let us come into the show every year since they took over. We've really tried to make that venue more accessible. It tends to be defending the passenger lift from people with coffee machines trying to sneak out, because that's why it breaks every year. But we've tried our best to try and do that. And I think that having this event tonight and having the opportunity to have conversations, that's the mark of, I'd say, a more mature version of that trade show. There are still some trade shows out there that we've reached out to that said no. And I feel that's kind of, I won't name names, but I promise not to. But something we talked about before is similar to what Maxwell was just talking about. A reasonable adjustment might be the safeguarding practices, because obviously you've got the educational background where that's normalized, and that's not normalized in bars, restaurants, pubs. That's a reasonable accommodation that you've seen people turn down.
Yeah, so being in the education background, basically safeguarding is a massive part of what we do. Like every beginning of the year, we have a training, like a small one, and then the big one every 2 years to make sure we are aware. And so it's the same. Because we're running a training coffee shop, it's still very much at the heart of what we do. We make sure that everybody's aware of the possibility of exploitation, there's quite a lot of things that might happen to those young people, and we want to keep them safe, and we want them to be able to tell us if something doesn't feel quite right. And when we were starting to talk to, possible jobs for our young people, we just realized that this is something that actually the hospitality sector doesn't know at all about. And then, they're very open. I think actually the culture is there most of the time, but then it's not like those very small changes where you observe and you make sure that the young people feel very safe and that they feel very comfortable to come to you, and that they know who to talk to if there is anything happening. All those kind of things are very important. And we had the example quite recently where we had an amazing big hospitality, big, I don't want to say the name. So anyway, so establishment, and they had, a few places where they wanted to take our young people. So it was amazing, very open, very interested in the safeguarding aspect. And then we asked, is it okay if some of your staff is DBS checked? And there they were like, oh, no, we don't want to. We feel like it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be giving them a second chance. We're very much about giving people a second chance. And I felt I really didn't understand, because to me, it doesn't mean that, knowing, it doesn't mean that we're not going to go forward. It's just understanding our staff. I feel it's very important to me. So, yeah.
And obviously, having worked with young offenders, my experience of that is I'd encourage anyone looking to give a second chance or similar to do a DBS check. I think it's collating the information to make that informed decision. When I first went to work in prisons, I was quite naive. I think most people are. I sort of said, I don't want to know what they've done. I just want to treat them with an open mind. And that made me slightly ineffective at helping them, because actually that meant I wasn't building individual holistic approach. It's important to understand what people, if you do a DBS check, you're making an informed decision, not just for that individual, not just for the people around them, but for that individual. That actually, if this person went to prison for something like that, then you don't want to put them in an environment that's going to maybe be, not great for that. And I think that's something that's really, really important. I'd encourage everyone to adopt an easy DBS check into their business. I don't think it would cause people to not give second chances. Does anyone disagree there? Does anyone feel? No, yeah.
No.
I think it's an interesting thing where accessibility and inclusion intersects when we're looking at things, having vulnerable adults with learning disabilities, working with people from other disenfranchised backgrounds. I think that we see this a lot with breadwinners, with the refugee charity, with asylum seekers, and actually them getting their first jobs. That's obviously a big concern. And to your point, the big companies are really good at that. They're very good at making informed decisions. And the small independents, I sometimes feel, are a bit naive about the approach they take to background checks and similar. But I think we've talked a lot here. I think we have got some questions that I'd like to go through. And once I go through the question, we had some questions sent in. At the end of these, we can ask the room if anyone has any burning questions. And as I go through these, I'd love for anyone who feels strongly about answering, just put your hand out, like, just go for it. I think it'd be great to let it come out naturally. So the first question is, whose responsibility is it to implement and pay for accessibility measures in our industry that are vital to creating open space and opening up to a wider variety of people? So whose responsibility is it to pay and implement those things, do we feel?
Do you mean to encourage the framework and the building of the correct framework and culture across the industry, or for that to be implemented into specific businesses?
So some additional context on the question. They noted the example of whose responsibility is it to pay for BSL interpreters for events like this, whether that be the venue, whether that be the other charities like Send, or
the businesses need to, but people need to build this into their P&L, right? So like a lot of coffee in companies have no P&L. Just look at the bank balance and be like, oh shit. So then you go and you build a basic P&L around margin, and you go, okay, our labor costs this much, London living wage is going up to this, etc. And then so people are often very product focused, right? And then they don't have a lot of room, and they go, okay, we can make this much profit, and there's no room to do anything else. This isn't just around inclusivity and accessibility. This is just generally as a business around whatever, whether it's innovation. Most small coffee companies I speak to, or even medium sized, they don't have an R&D budget of any kind. They're trying to do all of these things. They come up ad hoc, and they're trying to sort of squeeze them into their business. So I think making all of these different things part of your actual profit and loss, and something you can sustainably fund, right?
I think I'd push back slightly on it being just the business, though.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that might be a bit of a hot take considering the type of org I run. But I personally think that there's a responsibility to the community as well. I think that actually it's partly everyone's responsibility in the industry, not just for the actual paying and mechanical paying, but for the sign language example. I'd encourage everyone to learn a little bit of sign language. I'd encourage everyone to ask if there's going to be interpreters. If that makes that
Sure.
I think that would be what causes the business to say that they must make this step. I think that actually to the P&L point.
Yeah, well, it's like the sustainability topic, right? Which is people toing and froing between big industry being responsible for sustainable changes versus consumers changing their daily habits, right? And I think the same point is it's not one or the other, it's a combination of the two, right?
Any other thoughts on that? No, yeah, fine. That's no. Yeah. Next question then, and I can guess who's going to have a strong opinion on this. How can machine manufacturers create machinery that ensures inclusivity in the workplace? Well, funny enough, actually, Muriel and I were talking about this right before the panel. Obviously, we work in very specific type of disciplines.
Yeah. So we had a young man that can really use only one hand, and it's very hard. It's just very hard when you don't have the right machine, because you need your hands to, both hands to open the milk. You need both hands to, not pour, that's okay. But then, like tamper, like most of the steps, and then obviously the milk frothing. So it's just trick why all those steps. So like tampering should be obviously the machine. There are electric machines, but they cost a lot. Everything costs quite a lot, and it's a shame if as a small business to have to it's a big cost.
There's an effect though that accommodations made for people with disabilities are often where the best innovations come from. So I think we're all familiar with the puck press, which auto tamps. That's the solution we as a business put in place here at Carnico, because we had someone who's a transradio amputee, and we had to, she didn't have her arm. So she was able to tamp one-handed, and we also installed a machine that had a foot lever installed, the retrofitted.
With the quick spin, because again, like that, like cleaning a portafilter would require two hands to do with a towel, right? So yeah, there's sort of an interesting combination there of people pursuing automation for lots of other reasons, and to consider disability and accessibility when they develop those. Yeah.
We had a great example a while back now. We had a height adjustable bar, which had a coffee machine on. And we got this because we had a wheelchair user who we had to lower the bar for to use the coffee machine. We realized that one of our team was 6'4", and one of our team was 5'1" or so. And they both massively benefited from this because they got a machine, they'd raise it to their perfect height and they'd work on it. And that's a great example of how those innovations can really help everyone. But I think it's, there is a lot of equipment out there. But I think, there's some fantastic innovations that I guess the machine manufacturers, similar to the point we've talked about earlier, I would say they should listen and they should engage conversation.
Yeah.
In general, it's not just innovation. I think it's just those steps you make towards accessibility and inclusion makes it much easier for everybody. Like, so typically having easier interview practice, where it's hands-on and you can, and it's better. Like, nobody wants to sit in front of a potential employer and, talk about, it can bring lots of people uncomfortable. If just let me have a go, let me try, whatever, like and the onboarding process that can be so long, so difficult for not much more, gain out. Anyway.
This is a great question, I think. So the question is, how can inclusive employment models scale across larger models and supply chains without losing the depth of support that individuals need? And the context on that is, small organizations that start strong, and as they grow, they start to lose that effectiveness. And I think that that's something we've all probably seen in a different context or two. So I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on that. Sorry, I'll just go through it again. So the question is...
No, yeah.
Just how can inclusive employment models, as things scale, as a business gets bigger and older, how can it continue to scale up and continue that depth for support?
Do you think they're asking that question from a position of personal experience where they've seen a highly effective model at small scale not scale? I just want to know where the question is coming from, because obviously there's the counterpoint that actually a larger organization is often able to have the scale actually helps, right?
Yeah, I think I've seen something on this that with a lot of organizations that work with people with disabilities, the people that are working with them, the support workers, are usually the lowest paid staff. And that's fascinating because that actually means that as your organization grows, those young people, for me it's young people, those people who need that support, they become further and further removed from the expertise. And that's something in Send we've done the other way around. I mean, my most highly paid and most senior staff have to work with our learners. And I think that's, that intentional structure can prevent some of that. But I think that in other organizations, as you add more layers in, that's partly where that problem can seep in. And I think I have seen examples of that. I don't want to kind of say, because I feel mean saying it, but I think there are, any other thoughts on that?
For me, it sort of links to that point I made before, which is it has to actually be an intrinsic part of the business model, right? And not a token initiative, This is everything. For anything to be sustainable in coffee, it has to work long-term commercially, right? It can't appear. At the beginning of when we were all meeting and chatting about charities and stuff, it's become increasingly hard to get funding for charities, to get donations and sponsorship. And one of the projects I'm involved in is actually creating marketing value. So the companies who are now effectively funding the charity see it as a marketing benefit and spend to them, not as charitable giving. And suddenly they've got budget, right? So you're like, oh. And I think that's interesting, is actually framing stuff as charitable often isn't that helpful. You need to find a commercial model that has the impact that you're trying to achieve.
I think kind of to that point of framing things as charitable, I think often when you frame it as charitable rather than like an actual integral part of the culture and the business, I think, like you said, it can kind of become like tokenistic, or framed as people that need help, which people do need help, but I think framing it from a charity standpoint can often mean that it doesn't work out in the long run because people aren't actually, like you said, putting that into the framework. I think sometimes people have a good intention and it's maybe just a good quick idea rather than it being like these things take genuine, real hard work and dedication. Like you're gonna see it fail multiple times. You're going to have to try multiple different things out. I think you have to really be willing to stay the course and basically have it built into your actual business model rather than it being just kind of a tokenistic, oh, well, this will look good, image wise, rather than it actually being built in to the initial business model.
Yeah, and I've got a really strong opinion on that around organizational structure. One of my early projects I set up as a normal business. It was a private limited company. And that was very naive, it turned out, because there was a lot of situations where I was asked by investors and people around me, no, you owe profit. That's the point. You have a fiscal obligation to deliver profit. There are a lot of organizations out there that are for profit. And now running a charity, it's very easy for me to pick the road that is charitable, but it is interesting, that nuance.
I was actually sort of ashamed I don't know the answer to this question, but how does B Corp tie into accessibility? Because what B Corp obviously intends to do is create a governance structure which isn't just for profit, but you build in accountability for values which you're then judged against every year. So I don't know, in your experience running Send, are you interacting with many B Corps? What is there in the B Corp structure?
Yeah, quite often when we're talking to potential stockists, when we're selling our coffee to people, they'll ask, oh, and are you a B Corp? And we sort of say, like, well, no, we're a charity. And actually, charities can't be B Corps. I reached out to them, I asked, and they said, no, it's not designed for charities. Any charity that was a B Corp would be the highest scored B Corp in probably Europe by quite a wide margin, because all of the B Corp metrics are based on charitable practices that are legal obligations to charities by the Charity Commission. So the B Corp question is interesting because I find that people use B Corp and have it on there, but they don't ask what people's B Corp score is. And that's the point. The point is that it creates a metric.
So just to be clear, there is scoring within the framework where if you were able to successfully, put inclusivity and accessibility practices into the structure of your governance and business, you would get a higher score.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
there'd be companies out there that would have a fantastic score that would mean, wow, we should work with these people. But I feel
But no one reads the score.
no one's asking the question. I do love going around to trade shows, finding people who are registered as B Corp and saying, what's your B Corp score? And just genuinely, just a warning if anyone's a B Corp here, because I will ask, and it's shocking how many people say, oh, I don't know. And there'll be senior people, there'll be salespeople, and they have no idea what the company's B Corp score is. It means it's just not being used effectively. So thank you everyone for coming. We're going to continue conversations now in the room. Please stay, please have a drink, please have some more pizza that's come fresh. Thank you so much to these amazing panelists.